Welcome back to .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin.
And I'm Richard Campbell.
And we're back. This is the second show recorded the same day. And we just did a show with Dana Emp. And now April's going to be here. It's going to be a fun day. How you doing, Mr. Campbell?
Yeah. It's good to be working, right? Back in the groove of things. And things are excellent. You know, it's fall in Vancouver as well. The fire season ended late. We had smoke right into October. But now the rains have come. And if you remember last year around this time, we had like a meter of rain in 24 hours, which turns out to be even too much rain for us that is good at rain. Ended up with a bunch of flooding and so forth. So things are a little calmer this year. We're not working our way through Revelation's plagues this time around.
Yeah. This year, the West Coast got rain. The East Coast got a lot of rain. Everybody else, not so much.
No, not so much. And not necessarily where you needed it. You know, I spent a big bunch of time in Australia this fall, which was spring for them, and they had too much rain too.
Hey, so I got a story and a link for Better Know Framework, so roll the crazy music.
Awesome. All right, man, what do you got?
So I got this email from my mother, and, you know, my mother's in her 80s, and, you know, she does her best with technology, but, you know, certain things get by her. So this was an invoice from the Geek Squad.
Oh, wow.
That said, you know, we understand you want to renew your blah, blah, blah. We have charged you $400 some odd, and here's the invoice and the receipt. Now, the idea, it's a scam, right? And the idea is to get people to email back and say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't do this. And then they engage in some BS and take some more money or take some money. So I went looking. I didn't find anything at Snopes right away, but of all the places, Reader's Digest.
Wow. Are they still out there?
I guess so. Unless it's, you know, somebody
who's
who's
scam.
hijacked someone's hijacked their domain, but it's rd.com. So it's probably Reader's Digest, right?
Pretty legit.
Two-letter domains don't come around these days.
Nope.
So it talks about the Geek Squad scam and how you can avoid it. And it turns out that there's like several different ones.
Oh, wow.
But they're all based around Geek Squad because Geek Squad is the brand at Best Buy where you can take your laptops.
People know it, right? They recognize
know it. People trust it. You know, you would trust taking your broken laptop to Geek Squad and just dropping it off. And, you know, you don't think that they're going to steal anything. Well, anyway, so it talks about how
and to be clear,
works.
they don't, but scammers might impersonate them.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I want to be clear. Yes, I'm not saying anything.
Nothing bad with Geek Squad.
Nothing bad about the Geek Squad. I love those guys. So, but it basically goes into the different ways in which you can get scammed with this Geek Squad brand. And, you know, it's the same old stuff. Don't ever click on a link that's in your email. If you think it's from a bank that you have an account with, log into the bank. And if there's anything that you need to worry about, they will have given you notification in your account. Call the bank.
Right.
Never
change the medium.
Link.
Don't follow the chain. Change the medium.
That's it. Yeah. So that's the story. And it turns out my mother did not fall for it. And
she called you.
She forwarded it to me.
And said, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me this is a scam. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, right.
But this is as much we can hope for our non-technical loved ones, that they at least have enough radar to reach out to us and go, is this a scam? And it's like, yep, that's a scam. Well done.
Yes, well done. Yeah. So that's the story today.
Awesome.
Who's talking to us, Richard?
Congratulations to Grandma Franklin. Like she did the right thing.
She did the right thing. Yep.
I have met your mother over the years.
Yeah.
As I recall, she is a big fan of opera.
She's a huge fan of opera.
Yes. Somebody has to be because it's not us.
Not me. Yeah. She still tries to convince me, you know, and I'm like, Mom, I'm 55. Give up.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. If it was would have by now. Hey, I grabbed a comment off of show 1807, which is back in August of this year, where we were talking to Kartik about the application lifecycle management of the Power Platform, which is good because we're talking about Power Platform again here today. And we got this amazing comment from Juan Pablo on this show. Another one that didn't import properly into the new system, but I grabbed the comment out of the old system, and this is the comment. He says, hey, the Power Platform is a very easy to use platform, and it's impressive how fast it's evolving because he has a lot of features being added. Having said that, one of the things that stopped us from fully adopting it is that what we perceived as a lack of server-side logic at the low-code level. As far as we understood, once a connection is added to the Power App, the user using the app would either have user permissions in the connected source, or they would implicitly be using the access levels of the credentials used when adding the connection. In the latter case, even if the Power Apps could only use a subset of the operations in the source, the end user of the Power Apps could, in theory, execute the other operations the source provides. And this is interesting because we just recorded that show with Dana Epp, which, in the publication cycle would have been last week's show, talking about API exploitation. This is kind of like that, where if all this code's running on the client and you've got a bad actor here that could get access to some things, don't know that it's actually true. We'll talk to April a bit about this. Juan Pablo goes on to say, our understanding is that this is due to the fact that Power Apps logic runs client side, and that anything that would typically be enforced on the server side, like validation rules or security enforcement specific to users and roles, on a typical web app would have to be enforced by the system that the connector is connecting to, which could be a third-party API or SQL Server being connected to the Power App. So it looks like the way to accomplish that level of control is to create a custom API in code that would in turn talk to the sources needed to enforce those rules in code with the custom API, leaving Power Apps as just a very easy to use client app creation platform. There's nothing wrong with that model, just that it's important to keep that in mind when building solutions in the Power Apps platform. And to me, as a developer, when I look at Power Apps, the biggest thing that I'm excited about is this: give me an easy way to build a client that works on phone, tablet, PC, right? And odds are I'm going to build a bunch of APIs in the back end anyway, because I've got those skills. But we'll dig in with April about these security and validation issues. Juan Pablo, thanks so much for your comment. And a copy of Music Code By, it's on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on Facebook. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. And don't forget to use the SHA1 hash code that we provide on our website. That's complete crap. We don't provide
You're not doing that.
No, we're not doing that. It's a different world now that Mr. Musk owns Twitter, and who knows, we may have to.
At least we know who the chief twit is. Yes.
Yeah. We may have to resort to using a SHA1 encryption code in the future.
Who knows? But apparently for $20 a month, I can get a blue mark beside my name.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. You remember the whole, everyone was trying to get validation. They wanted that blue mark. Apparently he's now selling them for $20 a month.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Will the news ever end? I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is a good time to introduce our guest, April Dunnam. April's a process automation professional, a SharePoint siren. Did not know that designation existed, and
I think she
a karaoke queen. She is also a woman who codes but teaches others to build apps and automation with zero code. April's a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft with a love and passion for the Power Platform. Just so happens we were just talking about that. April, how are you? And welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yeah, the SharePoint siren gets people all the time. So I totally made that up.
The danger on the rocks have surely passed. Still I remain tied to the mast. Could it be that I have found my home at last? No, sorry. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, but the sirens were, from the Odyssey, right? They were the ones that were making all the, attracting the men to the rocks, and then their, boats would be dashed upon the rocks. I don't know if that's such a good moniker for you.
I don't know. Have you ever gotten immersed in SharePoint? Right, that's what happens when you get immersed in SharePoint.
Yeah. Okay. Now, now I get it. So if you're a SharePoint user, you want to attract those users to you so you can dash their boats on the rocks. I get it. Oh, wow.
Yeah. There you go. You got it.
I'm glad I paid attention in literature class. So tell us about the state of Power Apps in 2022.
It's, I think that the comment that you read earlier, it's constantly evolving. So many great new things are being added across the Power Platform stack here, and Power Apps is no exception. So many great new things on the horizon with AI, infusion with it. Like we just off the heels of Ignite recently, and that was one of the big things that was announced. Like Power Cards, so being able to kind of have a lightweight way of building adaptive cards but then also being able to have AI generate your app for you from an image file. I mean, that's pretty exciting to be able to upload an image of a form or something that you want to automate and then have it as an application and have Power Apps do that for you. And then using the same GitHub Copilot AI capability we have inside of Power Apps to build our formulas. So lots of things. And then, of course, in the pro dev space as well, being able to import a design from Figma. That's one that really excites me.
Oh, wow.
And then have that build a Power App for you. If there's anything like that was announced recently, that's probably one of the ones that gets me the most excited.
Wow.
If you don't know what Figma is, I learned about it last year because I had to use a design from Figma in an application for a customer. And one of the things that I thought it did was export to CSS and HTML, and it does not. And furthermore, the CSS that it created was absolute position. So if you want to make that CSS responsive, well, that's
ouch. Yeah.
So I like the idea that you could just import a Figma, some Figma stuff and then use it. Love it.
Now owned by Adobe. What could go wrong?
That's a good thing, I think.
Well, if it becomes part of the Creative Cloud, it's just a question of, do they take care of it? It's always challenging when a product changes hands like that. The visionary developers behind what made Figma successful stay on board and keep driving the vision forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Difficult to answer there. Did Juan Pablo have a point there about the validation on the client versus validation on the server and how endpoints are generated in Power Apps?
Yeah, so I mean, that was a good point. And then, I mean, ultimately, especially if you're talking about integrating your APIs with the Power Platform through our custom connector model, which allows you to bring those in. Yeah, you want to do as much as that validation as you can at the API layer itself.
Right.
And that's something that you can do. But when we're talking about using some of the built-in connectors, because, connector in the Power Platform, for those who might not have used it, is just a wrapper around an API. So we have over 700 different out-of-the-box connectors to various services that we can connect to already. And with those, so in addition to like how the security model works, it's, if you don't have access to it at the service layer, then you're not going to have access to it in the connector. So if we're connecting with SharePoint, since I come from a SharePoint background, if I don't have access to a particular document library or list, I'm not going to be able to perform any actions against that when I'm logged into that Power App that's using it, right? Because it's going to use my credentials, to Juan Pablo's point, and pass those through to the connector and verify if I have the right permissions for that. Taking it a step further, though, too, is at the connector level, we can define data loss prevention policy. So if there's certain actions that you can do in that API that don't want people to be able to do, like maybe go send out a tweet, but we want them to be able to read tweets. We do have that security built in with data loss prevention policies to be able to restrict it more granularly there. So he does have a point, especially when bringing in your own custom APIs.
But it also speaks to, if you're once you go down this M365 path, and Power Apps is part of that story, there's all this other stuff that is available, but you need to know about it. Like I don't think that a developer who's told make sure these endpoints are secure thinks, oh, I should go over to data loss prevention in M365 for that. But the bottom line is that will work. Like that's where to go. And it's a nice, like you don't have to build the consoles and stuff for that. There's a lot of code written for you already for setting security policy around all that over in DLP land.
Exactly. I mean, knowing is half the battle. So they say in G.I. Joe. So.
Well, And I wonder if Juan Pablo knew that too, because it's just, again, if you haven't spent time pressing against these issues, you may or not understand this. I talk about DLP over on the run as side routinely, just because I think a lot of folks who've moved workloads into M365, they're still thinking ACLs. They're still thinking the old security practices, and they're trying to find them somewhere in OneDrive. And it's like, look, it's different now, and it's better. Like it's genuinely more sophisticated and gives you a better view of what's going on and more granular controls. Like it's really quite great. So that to me is kind of exciting.
Very exciting. I mean, it's so much we could do there too, even to, if we're talking about integrating with the HTTP connector and be able to make those HTTP direct calls, even outside of a connector itself, being able to restrict endpoints with some of the admin capabilities in the Power Platform. So that's all baked in. You don't have to do anything extra, just do your configuration, and then you have that security in place.
Yeah, it's awesome. And when we talked to Kartik about the lifecycle management, we were talking sort of the role of the traditional developer. I even loathe to use the term pro developer just because I immediately think of the alternative and I think it's a derogatory. Like folks that are great with Power Apps, they're so helpful inside this infinite list of things we need to get built that we're never getting to the bottom of, especially because they take on that UI side really, really well. And the simple connector things that they can take off the plate are also great. But I got to imagine when I think of this, and I'm going to use the term fusion development model because I think Kartik told us that. And I'm like, okay, I can live with that because it's a positive, right? It's everybody's doing their best thing. I think customer connectors are where a lot of traditional developers are going to live in the work on a Power App.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, a lot of the citizen developers are so great at doing that kind of front end development side of things, building the Power App out how they would expect to see it. Because that's the cool thing about Fusion development that I'm sure Kartik touched on there is being able to bring in the people that are familiar with the business process and they know the problem that they're trying to solve. Therefore, they know this is the way I want to be able to interact and what the people using it would be able to want to interact with the app. So they can design that at the front end. They can do some of the out-of-the-box integrations with connectors. And then from the pro-dev traditional developer side, they can come in and integrate your internal business logic data through the connector model. And that's a really common scenario that we see in Fusion development.
And I feel like a healthy model, right? That this is everybody doing their best stuff. You call them citizen developers. I'm going to call them domain experts because it's really what they are. And that I see them. And it's also like, this person's an expert. This is not a less than. This is the person who genuinely knows where things should be on the screen to do their work, and they can build it themselves. And the idea that they would then come to me and say, I wish I had an API I could call that did X is pretty powerful. Like that's not a bad dynamic because you've already shown why you want that call that way, what information you're looking for, why that would be valuable. That's in some ways, it feels like more domain expertise and more well-reasoned domain expertise than you could get almost any other way. Like normally I'd spend a long time as a project manager to get to that request. And here I think I've got a way where in the process of building the app, we can get to those requests.
Yeah, it's a very collaborative and just efficient model, being able to have those domain experts in the process there, building the solution, knowing exactly what to ask for. Like we need to pull data in from X. I wish there was a way to do that, and knowing how to bring in the traditional developer to help bridge that gap. I mean, it just makes the whole application development lifecycle just way more efficient because you don't have to go through that whole requirements gathering process as rigid as you would have to, and understanding kind of the domain level knowledge. You just fill in the puzzle pieces as needed.
Well, and I remember this back in the 90s when Access and VB emerged. And you had a domain expert, somebody with another job who was just trying to add some automation to their lives, stop this repeating bit of work. But there wasn't a good process to detect that was going on. Often they got to a point where the department was now depending on this Access thing they'd cobbled together, and now it was breaking. And that's when they talked to dev. Said, hey, can you help us with? And you looked at what you guys have done a ton of work here and a lot of dangerous things too. And then you got to kind of untangle it. I just wonder if we're not going to be able to get involved sooner in these in the field kind of apps using the Power Platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. That's the ideal Fusion scenario is that traditional developers and those domain experts, citizen devs, are starting the project off from the beginning together and not coming in after the fact, right? We need to solve X problem for like an inventory management system. You're thinking through as the content expert or the domain expert there of what the app needs to do and how it needs to function. And you're already thinking through the pieces of what it needs to connect to, what the security layer should be like, how we should push it out, and that whole process from the start. That's obviously going to be ideal and where we see a lot of success, honestly.
Because these domain experts, they just aren't aware of any of that, right? They're just trying to solve the problem in front of them, right? It's not.
Yeah. Exactly.
The concern I would have is because I've been that guy too. It's like you always spread bad news when you show up to their plan. It's like, well, that's the part that violates our restricted security here. This is the part that's kind of against our regulatory body. That'll get us fined. You can't do that. Right. Like there's a lot of no often when the folks are found these tools and they're running wild.
Yeah, I mean that is the hard part. I think that's why it's easier to get in from it from the start and say like this is a cool idea. Like oftentimes as domain experts, we're just trying to put out the fires. We're trying to get solve problems, get it out there as fast as we can. And we don't often think about a lot of those details and like, is this compliant? Is this going to work? And all that. So, it's better to be involved from the start and mention things before you spent, however many hours building something and then have to deliver the bad news for sure.
It's like, really going to have to turn this off or we're all going to go to jail. But yeah, you'd rather get in sooner. What about a DevSec person or the IT folks? Like, when do they need to be in the loop as well?
Yeah, I think a lot when we talk about Fusion Dev, we talk about it from the traditional developer, the pro dev, whatever, and then the citizen dev. But we can't forget the IT pro, the security person in the mix too. I mean, that needs to be part of your Fusion team. That person to bridge the gaps there. Like we talked about DLP policies, data loss prevention policies earlier, having someone there that can come to the table. Okay, you're going to connect to this data. What kind of actions can we perform? Doing security audit and all that. So having that person involved from the start as well is really core to, those three main pieces of successful Fusion development.
Yeah, and I can see that going one of two ways. Either they've already used DLP policies and now we're struggling to access the data and wondering why we can't. But it's like, because the system's working as planned, now that you've shown you have a reasonable need, let me give you privileges to that. Or you're having a great old time having access to everything, and the security guy, is so frightening, he yanks his tinfoil hat off his head, and now has to learn DLP in a big hurry.
Yeah, I guess one could argue the first is better than the latter. You don't have to be, for sure.
It'd be nice if everything was already neatly locked down and so forth, but it probably isn't.
Yeah, probably not.
Never quite that simple, but at least giving them a heads up and saying, hey, there's a chance here, and there are tools for this. It's not like you have to invent a whole new thing. Right? That to me is pretty exciting. And am I describing reasonable scenarios like where these domain experts are really going to help us on the UI side?
Yeah, I mean, definitely on the UI side, but then also, from the logic side as well. I mean, we talk a lot about Power Apps now and building UI, but the Power Platform is more than just Power Apps. We have Power Automate for business process automation. So those, low-hanging fruit scenarios, those manual, tedious processes that you're doing, maybe it's, document approvals and things like that. Those are areas that the domain experts can really plug in and help with how these things should flow and help you know the process that you can automate those in Power Automate and even into Power BI with helping with dashboards and reportings to add that in. Because again, they know the data already. There might be in Excel, spreadsheets already. Maybe it's in Azure, whatever, and being able to easily apply those Excel-like skills into Power BI to create those visualizations based off how they know they need to see the data too.
Interesting, yeah, and they would all know better than we would what that workflow looks like, what those visualization needs to be. Otherwise, we're just turning around and asking them the questions to figure that out anyway.
Exactly.
So the idea that they would take those tasks on.
Yep. I mean, I'm thinking back to my consulting days, because I did a lot of .NET development, SharePoint development, and how long did it take just trying to understand the process in reviewing all the architecture diagrams, the flow diagrams and visuals and all that to even get a grasp of what it is. You don't need that time anymore if you're involving the domain expert in the process and they're just building it out and you're filling in the gaps.
What about the access to the databases? Do we have the DBAs involved in some respect? Are there filters on this, or are they just querying right in the database?
No, DBAs definitely should be involved in the process as well. Obviously, you can have filters into what you can call in the database, and a lot of that comes down to how you handle the connector, right? Like into your database and how you have that set up and in the back end there. But definitely don't want to be doing this blanket select star on all of your data there.
Well, again, I'm rolling out my old Access chops where my user credentials, because we had some other application that accessed the database, was carried all the way through. So I could fire up Access with my credentials and I had complete access to the database. Like it was fine. Off we went, did whatever we wanted, and terrified the DBA in the process.
Yeah, no, not that way in the Power Platform. We can have that granular access, thankfully. We've evolved.
Right. And we do have some layers there that can simplify it. I'm still thinking back to Juan Pablo's concerns. It's like, how raw is any of this and how much can be done declaratively by the DBA to sort of present organized data for domain experts to take advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we can do there. And again, it comes just down to knowing what there is and setting the stuff in your backend correctly of how you want to do that security, and then also at the connector and at the administration level. With those three levels there, you can kind of ensure that you're restricting and securing the data however you need to. Awesome.
It's just good just to realize that all these pieces are in place. You're not needing to invent any of this, but a lot, like when we talked to Kartik about the ALM stuff, I think it was brand new. Like it had only just been made available.
Yeah, it's still pretty new, like the ALM story side of things, and it's pretty exciting. Like I know I'm sure he touched on a lot. I listened to that episode as well.
Yeah,
but, lots coming down the pike with code spaces integration and just more and more stuff coming in to make that process easier.
Well, and what I really got from that was this is just going to be another part of the dev pipeline. It's still source code, it's still being checked in, it should still be tested. It's still in CI/CD. Like it's just ticking all the same kind of boxes, even if the tooling's a bit different.
Exactly. And I think that's been a big focus area on Power Platform all up too, especially with the ProDev integration, is making it so that you can stay in the tooling that you're used to and not have to jump into the Power Platform half the time to add in some of these integrations. So if you're wanting to build a custom connector, being able to do that natively from Visual Studio and just export, or through Azure API management and export as a Power connector. So just reducing that burden of having to really even learn.
It's not another tool for me as the developer. It's I don't have to go over the Power Apps. Although if you want to, you'd probably be pretty well over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another point when we talk about, pro devs plus traditional devs plus Power, is we often talk about from an integration standpoint, but just from a productivity standpoint in general, using the tools themselves, like maybe using a Power App for your front end and using that yourself, or using Power Automate and or Logic apps, depending on your situation, to add in some automations. It's good for just personal productivity as a developer also.
Right. Yeah. Well, you were trying to figure out how to build a multi-client UI. This is another way.
Yep.
And I'm going to interrupt for one moment for this very important message.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Raygun is sponsoring this portion of .NET Rocks, and who better to talk about Raygun than Raygun, JD Trask. Welcome for a few seconds.
Awesome. Hi.
Howdy, guys.
Hey. JD, I've read your stuff, and you talk a lot about that sort of customer-centric mindset, that you can use logging to really understand that your customers are happy or not happy, whether they tell you directly or not. Talk more about that, because I think being really customer-centric today is super important.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical in today's business. And, there's a lot been written about this with, say, for example, what Amazon's done, trying to be the most customer-centric business. People are putting the customer first. And that applies as much in software. Even at the end of the day, when we're talking about things like IoT and whatnot, ultimately, why do we build software? We build it for human beings, right? If we don't think about the user, the person who's on the receiving end of our software, we are missing the primary stakeholder in it. It's not actually our employer. It's not really even us as a coder. It's the customer. And so making sure that they are the center of how you think about these things is really important. So I'll give you one small concrete example. We do obviously track errors with one of our products, and we will also track how many unique users have been impacted by that error. Now, that's not identifying data. It's just a GUID that we do a distinct count on. But that way you could say, if I had 10,000 errors that affected 10,000 customers, or I had 10,000 errors that was one customer stuck in a loop, right? Helping you prioritize and sort and manage that for maximum customer impact is something that I think is missing from a lot of these sort of ops tools and whatnot, where you're just keeping an eye on stuff. And you might be fixing something just because the graph is wrong, not because a customer was having a bad experience. I think that's something that we need to continue to evolve and push on as an industry.
Boy, you got that right, man. It's like a bunch of chefs sitting around a pot of soup and not being able to taste it and saying, I think it needs more of this. No, it needs more of that. Right?
That is an awesome analogy I'm going to steal, Carl. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anything to do with food, that's right up my alley.
That's where you go.
And if you want to know more about Raygun, go to raygun.com and click on Start Your Free Trial. If you're enjoying this episode with April talking about building Power Apps, you should know that April is presenting a webinar that dives into best practices for devs to integrate Power Apps and Power Automate in their app development workflow.
She'll be joined by Kartik Kanakasabasan, a principal PM for dev tools at Microsoft, as they offer guidance to embrace low-code tools and free up your valuable time to stay focused on high-impact work.
You can register for the live event on Tuesday, March 28th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern, or catch the episode on demand afterwards.
Learn more and get registered to attend at aka.ms/powerdnr.
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
Talking to our friend April Dunnam about the current and evolving Power App story and just this whole idea of building that .NET developers should be a part of it or even do it entirely. Now, and just to be very clear, these are for internal apps, right? Like you're not going to put a Power App out in public. It's not a outward facing website.
For Power Apps. So we have two main types of Power Apps. We have Canvas applications, which is the kind, that you described. You have a blank canvas you can build that will work on a desktop and mobile. We have model-driven apps, which are really tightly coupled with Dataverse, which is a data platform for Power Platform, starting with your data model. So those are meant for internal, behind in your tenant applications use. But we do have Power Pages, which is another piece of the Power Platform. So if you do need a external facing like website, basically, where there can be anonymous, authenticated, that's kind of the niche that solves as well. So if you need that kind of functionality, it's a low code approach to website development. But no, it's not something that you would go put on the Google or Apple or Windows App Store, and sell like that.
Right. Yeah. It's not, you're not building retail apps per se.
Does that change the question about security and the API security that you were talking about earlier? If you're behind the firewall, is it that much of a big deal? You're protecting against your employees, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So it's lesser of a big deal, not having to worry about things like anonymous access and people outside of your organization, for sure. I mean, there are things that to that we can do, like Azure B2C, to be able to have other people outside of your tenant to be able to access some of these applications that you build, and then even as far as like deployment too, like touching on that, we can do. There's this thing called RAP for Power Apps, where we can use mobile device management to deploy it in an internal app store like that as well, just to have it, company branded. But yeah, it definitely does change the story a bit to the earlier question, because a little less of an issue since it is within your particular tenant.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think perimeter security anymore, right? We're always thinking in terms of zero trust. And so if they do penetrate somehow or get in an account that gets them in, they can't go anywhere they want. But it's RAP I hadn't seen before. So RAP is for making Canvas apps into custom branded apps.
Yes. Yeah. It's pretty new too, as well. It just went GA a month or so ago. So it's relatively new also. But yeah, being able to have that same branding as your other internal apps that you might deploy with mobile device management.
Awesome. I mean, it's just all these different places I could be looking for delivering something that my team wants, right? It's just another set of tools.
Yep. So again, just trying to reduce the effort and where you don't have to go to multiple locations, just being able to put it all in one bucket or stay on the tool of your choice.
What about the licensing for Power Apps? Is it per seat?
So we have basically 3 different licensing models. So 4 if you count the seated. So with Microsoft 365, we get what's called a seated version of Power Apps, where we can customize Microsoft 365, like your SharePoint list and libraries, and create applications for that. We also have paid licensing, so we can do a per user license, which gives you like an unlimited amount of applications that user that's licensed up can build. And we have a per app license as well. So you can license up a particular app for users there. But then we also have relatively new pay-as-you-go licensing. So if you want more of a consumption-based model, so if you're not sure, like you're just starting to roll out Power Apps, you're not sure how much usage you're going to get yet, and you want to, maybe it's only something like you would use once a year and you're not going to have consistently every month, every day people using, you can do a consumption-based approach also.
Interesting. Yeah, but I'm also thinking once you get public facing, like, am I going to get a surprise bill at the end of the month? Nobody likes surprise bills.
No, nobody likes that. So yeah, definitely want to consider carefully your licensing approach there.
Yeah, sure. And I have found generally that when I mess up a configuration and get the license wrong and get a surprise bill, if I make a phone call and we talk it through, they're pretty reasonable about, correcting stuff and so forth. Like, I got to imagine if you set that up wrong and then, got a hit from it, you could redo the licensing for it and get somewhere. Not that I'd guarantee anything, but it's like, it hasn't been that bad. Although I'm sure it can be if you don't pay attention. We sort of breezed past a couple of areas I think .NET developers can really dig into. What about customization on the UI side?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we tend to focus a lot on, the connector and bringing in your backend APIs because that's a big integration point. But another way is to extend the user experience. So in Power Apps, with our Canvas applications, we have a bunch of out-of-the-box controls that we can use, but this is often kind of a gap that we see where we need custom controls that aren't available out of the box. So we can actually use something called the Power Apps Component Framework to build those custom widgets, basically that we can then give to our domain experts, citizen devs, to be able to plug and play inside of their Power Apps applications to extend the UI. So this is a really common approach for Fusion Dev scenarios as well. We see like one thing, for example, we don't have out of the box is a file upload control or an iframe control. That's something that you can build a PCF, Power Apps Component Framework control around using React or JavaScript, HTML, and be able to integrate that into Power Apps.
Yeah. I can envision building out custom controls for a look and feel, if nothing else. Is that the company wants the stuff to look like this, and we can tailor that up, and then those controls are available for every app you build going forward. Yeah,
exactly. And that's the cool is they're reusable. You build it once, you can use it in Canvas apps, you can use them in the model-driven apps as well, and really standardize the apps that you're building across the board.
And it's HTML, like it's a web dev process.
Yep, just web dev. You can take even existing controls that you might have and make them like in React or things like that, and make them available inside of Power Apps.
Is there a bunch of interfacing I have to do to make sure it works properly with Power Apps? Like what makes it a part of the component framework?
You can use so you can use the Power Platform command line interface and just do a new Power Apps component framework control and then integrate that in there. So it just creates everything that you need in the back end for it to recognize as control, and then ultimately gets packaged up inside of a solution. So the Power Platform has this concept of solutions that we can package up our different assets in, and then that's how we deploy it inside of the Power Platform.
Sounds very cool. It's not something I haven't done a Power Platform app yet, but every time I talk to somebody at Microsoft, I'm like, now's the time. Now I think I'm going to check it out. But I haven't had a professional reason to do it yet.
Yeah, you need that project facing you where you're like,
got it.
Maybe this is the best way to solve this.
Right.
So are there add-ins for Visual Studio to work with Power Apps?
Yeah, so there's integrations, like I mentioned earlier, for the building the connectors. So we can actually export to the Power Platform from there. Also for Visual Studio Code, and we have a Power Platform extension. So all of that CLI stuff that you want to do, you can use the extension for that in VS Code to be able to create a connector, create a PCF, Power Apps Component Framework control, create a Power Page, do all like administration stuff as well, package your assets up as a solution, and all of that inside of the extension. New stuff I'm not sure if Kartik touched on too is the ability to do tunneling to be able to test your connectors integrated inside of Visual Studio as well, port tunneling, so that you can test those. So lots of tooling really getting added and baked into Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code.
That whole testing conversation is an interesting thing when you're dealing with like a low code scenario where sure, there's still code out there, but technically we're not responsible for it. So what are you testing?
Yeah, so like one of the examples, they had the Power Platform conference recently, and the keynote was Scott Hanselman and Julia from our developer division, and they did this whole fusion scenario of building a connector that you're going to use in a Power App. And so they showed kind of running into a problem real time with the connector not being able to write data to the service that they had the connector for. So that was an area where we need to troubleshoot this. How do we do it? And they used the new port tunneling capability to be able to say, okay, here's where it's failing to the endpoint. It's because it's missing this. It's not recognizing it as the right data type or whatever the issue was. And they're able to test at that, fix it, redeploy the connector with the fix in it, and then you're good to go. So that was a pretty cool example. And I just recorded an episode of that kind of case with Julia on the Low Code Revolution show, where she kind of walked through how it works. It's pretty cool scenario. Good example of fusion development, actually.
So when you're doing the port tunneling, you're basically like bypassing the client and being able to call the API directly and see how it behaves?
Exactly.
And I got to imagine one of the problems is if the back end has a problem, like what even shows on the client? I'm presuming it doesn't pop an ODBC error or anything. It just kind of quietly dies.
Yeah, you'll get, so on the front end, I mean, you can add, so Power Apps itself, you can add in your own error handling. So,
right.
There's, if error function. So it depends on what you show up there. And obviously in your dev tools in the browser, you might get an error, but nothing specific like in the front end there. Yep.
Yeah. And so this is really about us being able to see the behavior on the back end from the perspective of the client without being stuck in the client.
Exactly.
All right. So, but yeah, and it's this is actually a feature of Visual Studio. This is not VS Code or anything else. This is we want the professional developer running their big gun IDE in here to help us figure this out. Like, I feel like I have a job now, right? Where it's like, oh no, the way we do this is with you.
Yep.
That's pretty exciting. Like to just go, okay, I don't know, we want you involved in that. Of course, I'm going to get to look at a lot of JSON along the way, aren't I?
Oh yeah,
getting around it.
Well, it was hitting me anyway, but no, it's a powerful tool, and it's a good role, I think, for a .NET dev when Power Apps are being developed, regardless of what other stuff you want to do. Like I love building client components. I think that's really cool. If the company's starting to bet on Power Apps internally, the fact that we can do some styling and things and make stuff look the way we want it to look, so that everything gets built that way. Yeah, the enterprise architect in me adores that. It's like, yeah, we're going to do a bunch of that. But the debugging side here and being able to understand what's going on using our tools, that I feel is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
And by the time this show is published, this won't be a special feature anymore. It'll just be built in. Because port tunneling was like on a beta test or something for quite a while. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
What haven't we talked about? Where does the source code exist? Like, how do I redeploy a Power App?
Yeah, so we have integration with Git, so we can pull it down. So as part of that command line interface, we can actually unpack our Canvas app source code so that we can edit that, put it in source control. So it's YAML files behind the scenes that we can edit there. And we can do kind of collaborative development that way with some of the Git integration also. So you can edit and manipulate the Canvas app inside of Visual Studio, VS Code, and be able to repackage it up and push it back up into Power Apps.
But also roll back, right? I mean, now that it's source control, it's like it's version just like every other piece of software. We can go back and forth as necessary. Do a little discovery to see who broke the thing. Like all of that's living in GitHub the same way.
Yep, exactly.
It may say low code, but it's still code.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, hopefully we hit on that. Like there's still definitely big integration. There's still code, even though it is low code, that needs to be, going through the same channels as traditional code.
Have we gone much down when I think about CI/CD pipeline, I think about automated testing. Like what test tools work well with Power Apps? Can I fire up Selenium on them?
That's a good question. I don't know if like Selenium, if that works or not. Like I know we have built-in testing. We have Power Apps Monitor to be able to do some monitoring. And then we have a testing built into Power Apps itself where we can run kind of our own unit test. Also be able to integrate with Azure, like App Insights, and be able to do stuff like that. I know somewhere in the community, I saw someone doing some integration with Playwright too. For testing.
Just did that show. Yeah.
Yeah. Not out of the box, but it was a pretty cool scenario. So yeah, there's definitely, I think, probably more to be done there, but lots of integrated testing already baked in.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to fire up Selenium today anyway. If I could go down Playwright's path, I was pretty impressed with Debbie O'Brien's work, all the stuff she talked about with Playwright. That's well worth learning.
Yeah, for sure.
Does Microsoft have like an internal or external list of customers who've been successful with Power Apps that you can share?
Yeah, so we actually have a Power Platform customer stories site where we collect all these stories from different customers who have had success. And we even have a specific section on there for Fusion development stories. So if you're really wanting to learn more about, okay, what organizations are actually combining the traditional code with low code, that's a really good place to go. And I can track down the link there for that. But, one that I always love to tell about that's on there is Western States Caterpillar. I mean, that's just a really good case study that we have. If you want to read more about that, of how they've embraced Fusion development. They kind of have a Fusion development team where we're building applications that have Power Apps as the front end, but they're using Azure SQL as a backend with a custom connector to a web API around that to be able to read and write data. They're using, storing image in Azure Blob Storage, and they're all working together to build these solutions. It's just a really interesting story. And we have several similar stories like that of organizations and how they're kind of embracing
and it's Caterpillar. They're tractors. Like that's all cool, right?
Right.
It's really cool. I mean, they literally built a Power App in the field that they can take pictures of their inventory, and they have a sales app too that they're using, and we're able to do that in a fraction of the time as what it took.
Isn't that interesting? Because you think about the modern, when we want to go across all these clients, part of it is that these clients are portable, that they are in the field and they can do certain, rather than you bring in the work to the PCs now come out to where the work is. And you can do some, like taking pictures of the state of a machine after a rental. Right. I think that's pretty powerful, or what the kind of damage is or what maintenance needs to be done. Like that's all stuff that's hard to do in traditional applications. But if you had a tablet or a phone in hand, it's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Power Apps makes it so simple too. Like, the whole taking a picture. I mean, there's just out of the box picture controls. You don't have to code anything in. There's even, mixed reality controls. There's some case studies out there of people using mixed reality in Power Apps to be able to visualize things on the shop floor and like where things should go. And so many stuff that's just baked in where you don't have to do anything extra.
Well, we wondered how HoloLens was going to be developed against. We're going to end up in Power Apps and HoloLens?
I don't know. I mean, the mixed reality controls are already in there. So I'd say anything's possible.
So I understand you have a URL for our listeners.
Yeah, so we're actually going to be doing a developer digital meetup on kind of this whole topic of Fusion development and how pro devs, traditional devs can utilize Power Platform. So if you go to aka.ms/power DNR, .NET Rocks, you can go to that page to be able to sign up for that webinar there and kind of go a little bit deeper into some of these topics that we chatted about.
That's really great. So what's next for you, April? What's in your inbox?
A lot, just continuing to kind of talk about the Fusion Dev story and tell pro devs what there is to do with the Power Platform. We're going to be working on a web series on the Power Platform command line interface and how to get started with that, looking at kind of doing some more content around, Power Platform fundamentals from a pro dev standpoint. So, what can you do and how to get started and all that. So, and then just keep spreading the word about the Power Platform for the community and creating content.
We're going to see you in December, right? Like you'll be at Dev Intersection, and
I will. Yeah, I'll actually be doing a workshop on getting started with the Power Platform and custom connectors. So basically everything we talked about today.
Oh wow!
It's a hands-on workshop. Yeah, with Dan.
So you're a .NET developer listening to the show. Think about coming to the conference. Like you could take this workshop and get your feet wet with Power Apps right off the bat. And I think if you take 3 workshops, it comes with an Xbox.
Now there's a pitch.
I'll include a link to the show.
Yeah, definitely. Well, April, thanks. It's been a pleasure. And, thanks for educating us on Power Apps.
Thanks. It's been fun. I always love talking about Power Platform and talking with you all.
All right. We'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a